We're counting down the 8 most problematic steam locomotives ever produced. A ranking where ambition crashed into reality, where brilliant engineering created operational nightmares, and where locomotives that looked like triumph turned into financial disasters. Some nearly bankrupted their railroads, while others couldn't perform the most basic task expected of any engine. Expect machines that destroyed their own infrastructure, designs that killed their crews, and prototypes so problematic they were scrapped almost new. Which locomotive's problems were so severe it proved steam power itself had reached a dead end? Let's start at number 8 with a locomotive that couldn't reliably start a train. Number 8 on the list gleamed like a vision of tomorrow. The Pennsylvania Railroad S1 stretched over 140 feet from coupler to coupler, wrapped in Raymond Loewy's Art Deco streamlining that made it look more like a bullet than a locomotive. Its 6446 wheel arrangement was unprecedented, a massive duplex design with 2 complete engine sets under a single boiler. When it rolled out in 1939 for the New York World's Fair, crowds stared in awe at what seemed to be the future of American railroading. The shark-nose cowling, the smooth flanks, the sheer impossible length of the thing promised speed and power beyond anything the rails had seen before. But beneath that stunning shell lurked a problem the Pennsylvania Railroad could never quite solve. The S1's divided drive, its 2 separate engine sets, each powering their own set of drivers, refused to work in harmony. One set of wheels would bite the rail while the other spun uselessly, creating a violent lurching that shook the entire train. Engineers fighting to start heavy consists from station platforms watched helplessly as drivers whirled and shrieked, the locomotive going nowhere despite its 6,900 horsepower. Test runs became the stuff of legend for all the wrong reasons. There are claims, unverified and hotly disputed, that the S1 touched 156 miles per hour on a midnight dash across Ohio. But speed meant nothing when the engine couldn't reliably perform the basic job of getting a train moving from a dead stop. Maintenance logs from Altoona tell the real story. Constant running gear damage, side rods bent from the violent slippage, frames cracked from the stress of 2 engines fighting each other. Crews developed a bitter nickname for it. They called it the Big Engine, their voices dripping with sarcasm every time they had to take it out. The Pennsylvania Railroad had ordered it, expecting to build a fleet. Only one was ever constructed. By the late 1940s, it was gone, scrapped quietly like an expensive mistake the railroad wanted to forget. The S1 proved that you could build the longest, sleekest steam locomotive in America and still create something that couldn't do the one thing every locomotive must do: start a train and keep it moving. Sometimes the most beautiful machines hide the ugliest failures. Number 7 was too powerful for its own railroad. The Great Western Railway's massive Pacific, christened the Great Bear in 1908, rolled out of Swindon Works as Britain's first and only 462 at the time. It was built to compete with the larger American engines, making headlines across the Atlantic, a statement of British engineering ambition wrapped in polished Brunswick green. At unveiling, crowds gathered to marvel at its size, its power, its promise of a new era for the Great Western. Newspapers hailed it as the flagship that would carry the railroad into the 20th century with authority and speed. The problem became clear within months. The Great Bear was a prisoner of its own impressive specifications. At 20 tons per axle, and with a rigid wheelbase that fought every curve, the locomotive was too heavy and too long for most of the Great Western's network. Route restrictions came down like a cage. It could only run the London to Bristol main line. Turntables at other terminals couldn't rotate its length. Bridges on branch lines were weight restricted against it. Meanwhile, the railroad's smaller 460 Castles and Stars ran everywhere, handled the same trains, and did the work without complaint or limitation. Dispatchers faced a scheduling nightmare every time the Great Bear needed assignment. They couldn't simply slot it into service like any other engine. Routes had to be verified. Backup plans made for the inevitable moments when the Big Pacific wasn't available and some smaller, more flexible locomotive had to cover. Days would pass with the Great Bear sitting idle in the shed, waiting for an appropriate duty, while lesser engines hauled the expresses it was built to dominate. The railroad's entire operational philosophy was standardization, interchangeable parts and locomotives that could substitute for each other without fuss. The Great Bear stood against everything that made the Great Western efficient. Worse still, the shops at Swindon spent disproportionate resources maintaining one unique locomotive. Special tools, unique parts, knowledge concentrated in the hands of a few fitters who understood its quirks. All this for an engine that couldn't pull more than the standardized designs and couldn't go where they went. The contradiction became impossible to ignore. In 1924, after only 16 years of service, extraordinarily short for a prestige locomotive, the Great Bear was scrapped. The railroad built a Castle-class engine and gave it the same proud name as if trying to forget the original had ever existed. The Great Bear's problem wasn't that it failed, it was that it succeeded too well at being special, at being powerful, at being impressive. In doing so, it became useless to the railroad that created it. Sometimes the worst problem a locomotive can have is being too good for the job at hand. Number 6 looked like propaganda made real, and that was exactly the problem. The Soviet Union's P-36 class emerged in the 1950s as the flagship of socialist passenger service, wrapped in stunning, streamlined fairings and painted in bold colors that photographed beautifully for newsreels. These locomotives appeared in posters and official films, symbols of Soviet engineering prowess meant to showcase the superiority of centralized industrial planning. Visually, they were magnificent. Camera crews loved them. Party officials pointed to them with pride. Behind that polished exterior lurked a catastrophic secret. The P-36 has suffered from wildly inconsistent production quality, a problem that turned identical-looking locomotives into mechanical roulette wheels. Different foundries across the Soviet Union cast supposedly identical parts, but inconsistent metallurgy meant components that should have been interchangeable simply didn't fit. Frames arrived with different metal, compositions in the same production batch. Welding quality varied so dramatically that some locomotives developed cracks in their frames within months, while others ran for years. Bearings overheated because tolerances weren't maintained from one engine to the next. The Soviet production system prioritized meeting quota numbers over quality control, and every P-36 paid the price. Depot crews learned quickly that two P-36s might share a class designation, but behaved like completely different machines. Maintenance workers began keeping secret notebooks, unofficial records tracking which individual locomotives were reliable and which were problems waiting to happen. Some engines needed bearing replacements every 3,000 kilometers, a tenth of the design specification of 50,000. Others ran smoothly for months. There was no way to predict which P-36 would arrive at your depot, no way to know if you were getting a solid performer or a maintenance nightmare. Engineers requested specific engine numbers, avoiding the known troublemakers. The contradiction deepened when it came to the showcase locomotives. The P-36 is selected for official photography and propaganda films, received disproportionate maintenance attention, getting new parts and careful adjustments while working examples out on the lines struggled with worn bearings and cracked components. The locomotives that appeared in newsreels were not representative of the fleet. They were carefully maintained props, evidence of an excellence that existed only for the camera. The P-36 was built to prove Soviet superiority on the world stage. Instead, it proved that propaganda photographs couldn't hide metallurgical reality from the engineers who had to keep them running. Beautiful paint and streamlined shells meant nothing when the metal underneath was inconsistent, when welds failed, when supposedly identical parts required field modifications just to fit. The P-36 looked like triumph. It ran like a lottery. Nobody wanted to win. Number 5 turned a simple coal delivery into an engineering argument that lasted decades. The South Australian Railways imported Francis Webb's compound expansion system from Britain in 1886 for their new 500-class locomotives, seduced by promises of dramatic fuel savings. The theory was elegant. Use steam twice, first through high-pressure cylinders, then again through larger low-pressure cylinders, extracting every bit of energy from each pound of coal. On paper, compounds offered efficiency that simple expansion engines couldn't match. The complex valve gear and dual-cylinder arrangement looked like the future of economical railroading. Reality arrived the first time a crew tried to start one from a station platform. Compound locomotives needed their cylinders in precisely the right position to move. If the low-pressure piston sat at the wrong point in its stroke, the engine simply wouldn't budge. Drivers had to climb down with iron bars and manually rotate the Wheels to the correct starting position, a process called barring over that was absurd for a machine meant to save labor and improve efficiency. In regular service, the nightmare compounded. 500 class engines stalled at signals and couldn't restart. They died on grades, wheels locked in positions that made movement impossible without manual intervention. Traffic ground to a halt while crews wrestled with bars and curses, trying to coax their locomotives into the magic position where steam could finally do its work. Trains backed up behind stalled compounds. Dispatchers tore their hair out trying to root around the unpredictable failures. Crews discovered they could disconnect one set of cylinders entirely, converting the compound into a simple engine that at least would start reliably, even if it threw away all the theoretical efficiency that justified the design in the first place. Some 500 class locomotives spent more time running as makeshift simple engines than as the compounds they were built to be. The South Australian Railways management refused to admit defeat. Engineers spent more than 20 years trying fixes, starting valves, modified valve gear, rebuilt cylinder arrangements, endless adjustments chasing the efficiency Webb had promised. Management insisted the compounds would work if only they were properly operated, shifting blame to the crews who had to fight them every shift. Union records tell a different story, filled with requests from drivers asking for transfers away from 500 class assignments. Men willing to take pay cuts or less desirable routes just to escape the compounds. Eventually, reality won. The survivors were converted to simple expansion or scrapped early, their theoretical advantages abandoned for the basic reliability every locomotive must have. The 500 class proved that efficiency on paper means absolutely nothing. When your locomotive can't reliably leave the station, sometimes the simplest problems like starting when you're supposed to matter more than all the fuel savings engineering can promise. Number 4 had the heart of a racing car and the job of a draft horse. The mismatch nearly tore it apart. The London and Northeastern Railways P2 class Cock of the North emerged in 1934 as Nigel Gressley's attempt to bring automotive precision to railway power. Instead of traditional slide valves, it used rotary cam poppet valves like those in high-performance automobile engines. The theoretical advantages were compelling. Precise valve timing, better steam distribution, higher efficiency at speed. Gressley envisioned modern, high-performance freight power that could conquer the grueling Edinburgh to Aberdeen route with its punishing grades and tight schedules. The maintenance nightmare became apparent within months. Poppet valves demanded precision that railway depot crews simply weren't equipped to provide. Cams wore unevenly under the constant pounding of heavy freight service. Springs broke. Valve timing drifted out of specification, causing rough running that hammered cylinders and damaged internal components. Traditional slide valve gear could be adjusted trackside with hammers and wrenches, the basic tools of railway maintenance. A skilled fitter could tune conventional valves by feel and sound, making adjustments between runs. Poppet valves required workshop precision, specialized measuring equipment, and patience that freight schedules didn't allow. At Haymarket Depot, maintenance records tell the story in blunt numbers. Cock of the North spent more time under repair than the conventional P2s that followed it. Maintenance windows that should have taken hours stretched into days. Fitters who could handle any standard locomotive in the fleet found themselves battling a machine that refused to respond to traditional railway fixes. You couldn't coax poppet valves into cooperation with a hammer and experience. They demanded engineering precision in an environment built around practical repair and quick turnarounds. The problems went beyond maintenance complexity. The precise valve events that promised efficiency created hammer blow forces that traditional slide valves spread out over smoother cycles. Those sharp, concentrated impacts transmitted directly into the track structure. Reports from the Aberdeen district showed accelerated rail wear wherever P2s ran regularly, the roadbed taking a beating from forces it was never designed to absorb. The combination of high power and sharp valve action literally pounded the railroad apart beneath the locomotive's wheels. By 1938, the writing was clear. All P2s were rebuilt with conventional Walschaerts valve gear, the automotive precision stripped out and replaced with traditional railway engineering. The conversions continued through 1944 as each engine cycled through the shops. Gressley's vision of precision valve control met railway reality and lost. A locomotive is maintained by fitters with hammers, not mechanics with micrometers. It runs on tracks laid for traditional forces, not optimized for sharp impacts. Cock of the North proved that borrowing from other industries only works when the borrowed technology can survive in railway conditions. Number 3 didn't just fail, it killed. The Canadian National U4A class Northerns rolled out in 1936 as powerful, modern 484s designed for fast passenger service across the Canadian prairies. High-pressure boilers rated at 275 pounds per square inch drove them at speeds that made schedules look easy. Lightweight construction meant efficiency and speed. In their first years, they were successful, popular with crews who appreciated their power and responsiveness on the long runs between cities. Then the explosions began. Between 1940 and 1943, a series of boiler failures turned the U4A from a success story into a nightmare. The failure mode was catastrophic and terrifying. The crown sheet, the top plate of the firebox that forms the roof over the flames, would lose water coverage. Overheating followed instantly. The weakened steel would collapse or explode, releasing superheated steam in a massive, violent burst. Engine 6218 failed near Nakina, Ontario. The fireman died in the explosion. The engineer survived with severe scalding that left him scarred and broken, never to work the rails again. Accident investigation reports revealed the deadly flaw in the boiler design. The U4A's combustion chambers, extended fireboxes meant to improve efficiency, created dead zones where water circulation failed. In these pockets, scale from poor water quality built up undetected, insulating the crown sheet from the water that should have kept it cool. The metal would heat, weaken, and fail before anyone knew there was a problem. Metallurgical analysis showed the pattern again and again: inadequate circulation, hidden scale buildup, sudden catastrophic failure. Terror spread through the crews. Men who had proudly taken U4A assignments now requested transfers. Union halls filled with engineers and firemen demanding answers, wanting to know if the locomotive waiting for them at the roundhouse was safe or a bomb on wheels. Canadian National Operating Bulletins from the period read like desperate pleas, ordering extreme caution, mandating water-level vigilance, trying to prevent the next explosion through procedure when the real problem was fundamental design. Every shift became a gamble. Every run carried the possibility that this would be the trip where the crown sheet let go. Canadian National had no choice but to act. All U4A boilers were extensively modified with improved water circulation systems. Pressure was reduced, sacrificing some of the performance that made them desirable. Rigorous inspection protocols turned routine maintenance into exhaustive examinations, mechanics searching for the hidden scale that could mean death. The modifications worked, but the trust was shattered. The U4A proved that every pound of pressure you add to a boiler is a pound of risk you hand to the men who fire it. Power means nothing when the price is measured in lives. Number 2 held a speed record for 68 years. It also couldn't run in the rain. The German State Railways Class Euro 5 emerged in 1935 as Germany's streamlined speed champion, a locomotive wrapped in Art Deco curves and aerodynamic fairings that made it look like it belonged in the future. On May 11, 1936, one of these machines reached 200.4 kilometers per hour, just over 124 miles per hour, setting a steam speed record that would stand until 2003. The stunning design, with its shrouded wheels and swooping lines, became a centerpiece of Nazi propaganda, featured in films and photographs as proof of German technological superiority. But the streamlined casing that made the 05 fast also trapped heat with nowhere to escape. Every mechanical component, bearings, valve gear, cylinders, pistons, sat enclosed inside the aerodynamic shell. In summer or during sustained high-speed running, temperatures inside the shrouding climbed to 60 or 70 degrees Celsius, hot enough to scald bare skin. Bearings failed under the relentless heat. Lubricants broke down, turning from protective oil into useless sludge. Crews couldn't inspect the running gear without stopping the locomotive and dismantling access panels, a process that took hours. Maintenance teams fought back by cutting inspection hatches into the streamlined shell. Defeating the very aerodynamics that justified the design in the first place, the weather problem proved even more absurd. The enclosed running gear became a perfect trap for mud and water. In wet conditions, rain entered through the gaps necessary for wheel movement, but couldn't drain away. Water mixed with road grit and coal dust, creating an abrasive grinding paste that destroyed bearings and motion parts from the inside out. Conventional locomotives ran cooler in the rain, water helping to wash away debris and cool hot metal. The 05 turned rain into a weapon against its own machinery. After runs in wet weather, maintenance crews discovered wheel bearings that had run completely dry, all the lubricant contaminated and displaced by the muddy slurry trapped inside the shrouding. Only 3 Class 05 locomotives were built. The streamlined shells were removed from the working engines, converting them into conventional-looking machines that could actually survive daily service. The record-holding locomotive kept its beautiful casing but rarely ran, preserved more as a museum piece than a working example of railway technology. Test data was impressive. Operational reality was impossible. The 05 was built to prove that speed came through streamlining, that aerodynamics would revolutionize rail travel. Instead, it proved that locomotives live in weather, not wind tunnels. They exist in a world of rain and mud and summer heat, and no amount of Art Deco styling can change that fundamental reality. Sometimes looking like the future means you can't survive the present. Number 1 was the most problematic steam locomotive ever produced because it succeeded. It did exactly what it was designed to do, and in doing so, it proved the entire concept was doomed from the start. The Baltimore and Ohio's EM1 Yellowstone type, christened Lord Baltimore, arrived between 1944 and 1945 as the railroad's final, most powerful steam locomotives. These 2884 giants were designed to haul 11,500-ton trains over the Appalachian grades that had broken lesser engines for decades. Mechanically, they were excellent, reliable, powerful, well-designed in every detail. On paper, they represented the perfection of late-era steam engineering. The catastrophic reality emerged as soon as they entered regular service. The EM1s were so heavy, over 500 tons when fully loaded with coal and water, and so powerful that they destroyed Baltimore and Ohio's aging infrastructure with every trip. Bridges needed emergency reinforcement. Track required constant maintenance, rails wearing at rates the railroad had never seen. Ties crushed under the concentrated weight. Turntables at critical junctions couldn't handle the massive locomotives, forcing expensive installations or operational workarounds. Engineering reports from the period tell the brutal truth. The railroad was spending more money upgrading infrastructure to support 30 EM1 locomotives than those engines saved in operational costs. The economics became impossible to ignore. By 1950, EMD-F unit diesels proved they could pull similar tonnage using multiple unit lash-ups. 3 or 4 diesel units working together matched the EM1's power without requiring turntables, without needing water stops every 100 miles, without demanding the robust infrastructure that steam locomotives had always needed. The diesels could run on the existing railroad using what was already there. The EM1s required the railroad to be rebuilt around them. The final irony cut deepest. The Lord Baltimore and its sisters were delivered practically obsolete. Their very perfection as steam locomotives, their massive coal capacity, their need for heavy-duty track and bridges, their requirement for specialized facilities made them dinosaurs before they accumulated 100,000 miles. Some were retired with less than 10 years of service, their boilers barely broken in, their running gear practically new. They had done nothing wrong. They had succeeded completely at being what they were built to be. That success revealed the final truth about steam power itself. The Lord Baltimore was problematic not because it failed, but because it succeeded so completely at being a steam locomotive that it revealed the age had passed. It was a magnificent answer to a question the railroad industry had stopped asking. Across all 8 problematic locomotives, one pattern emerges clear. Sometimes the biggest problem isn't failure. It's being perfect at the wrong thing at the wrong time in the wrong world. Across all 8 problematic locomotives, one pattern emerges clear. Sometimes the biggest problem isn't failure, it's being perfect at the wrong thing, at the wrong time, in the wrong world. The S1 was too beautiful to start a train. The Great Bear was too powerful for its own rails. The P-36 looked like propaganda because it was. The 500 class couldn't leave the station. Cock of the North brought precision to a world built on hammers. The U-4A killed the men who trusted it. The Class 05 couldn't run in weather, and the Lord Baltimore succeeded its way into obsolescence. These locomotives prove that in engineering, as in life, ambition without context is just another way to fail. The most problematic machines aren't always the ones that break down. Sometimes they're the ones that work exactly as designed and reveal, in doing so, that the design itself was the problem all along. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment below and give this video a like if you enjoyed it. See you on the next one.